All right. Well, it's actually 2:45. You know.
It is.
Yeah. We have a heavily weighted right side of the room, you guys, but I don't want us to devalue the left side. Yeah.
Is that a political thing?
No. I don't know. We see you, we love you,
That's
right.
and you are a cherished member of this community.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And
We could all move to the middle.
Yeah.
The right
We could
side.
all move to the middle where 85% of the world is.
Yeah.
The priest is telling you to move on.
Yeah, and if anyone wanted to move, that would still be okay.
That would still be okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is our last workshop time of the day, isn't it, Justin? We made
is.
it.
Praise
We made
God.
it to the last workshop time of the day. This one will be a specific angle that we're grateful that y'all are here for. My name is Reverend Thomas Hankins. I am a clergy member in the United Methodist Church, and we have with us a panel of what we're calling religious professionals, people who work in faith and religion and church from across many different traditions and jobs. And so we're going to be speaking today, or they don't know this, I'm going to be asking them questions today about their experiences as religious professionals and what that means for their own mental health and their own experiences, because I think that's valid. And if you're in this room, then you may know a clergy person or two, you may know a religious professional or two, and to learn to see them and to relate to them in that way will be incredibly important. So I'm going to invite the panel to introduce themselves, and I'll step to the side. And yes, Rabbi, I guess you get to go first. And so can you tell us your name and what your role is now and how long you've been working and kind of the faith context?
Absolutely. My name is Rabbi Johanna Kinberg, and I have been ordained as a rabbi for 21 years. I'm also married to a rabbi, and my father was a rabbi. So there's a lot of rabbi in our family.
Is that what rabbi is, plural? Rabbi?
Rabbi, yeah, rabbis.
Rabbis.
Yeah, rabbis. And I am currently the senior rabbi at Congregation Kolami in Kirkland, Washington.
I'm Justin Lindstrom, and I'm an Episcopal priest. I serve at Christ Episcopal Church in the Monte Vista, Alta Vista area, just north of downtown here. And I'm in my 26th year of being a priest. And so it's been a long ride, and it's a good ride. So, yeah.
Great.
Married and have 2 kids, and love what I do. Thank you.
I'm Trevor Alexander. I'm co-vocational. I work as a Protestant chaplain at University of Incarnate Word, senior pastor of True Vine Church. I am the regional bishop for South Texas for my Reformation. And I've been doing this about 37 years or so. I'm still a rookie, trying to learn. I actually will cut my teeth in campus ministry in United Methodist.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
And my context is education. So I'm a seminary professor, a college professor, and do a lot of preparing folks for ministry and being with folks who are called to ministry and determining their ministries, working with congregations in education, doing continuing ed. And I'm a lay person, and I think that's an important role as well for lay theologians.
Yeah. All right, so any panel by me is going to have questions that are atypical, so I'm sorry. But for the sake of this, you can jump in whenever, or we can move down the row. When was the first time in these careers that you have that have, I'm sure, had all sorts of shapes and curves and ups and downs over them, do you remember the first time when you thought, I might not be okay right now?
I'm laughing because I think it was when I was ordained. I was kneeling in front of my bishop.
That moment.
Yeah, that moment. I was kneeling in front of my bishop and I was sweating to death. I was just telling the story that the church had lost its air conditioning. I was ordained in Houston in August, and I had a wool cassock on and a surplice on top of that, kneeling in front of my bishop, who is from Cuba, and he goes to lay his hands on my head, and he goes, "Oh no," because my head was I was just dripping wet. And over the microphone, he says that, so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not good. I'm not well. This is not happening. I'm going to pass out. He takes out a hanky out of his cassock, and I said, "Is it clean?" He goes, "Yeah, it's clean." And he wipes my head, and then he ordains me. So I think that was the first moment that I realized that this is going to be an interesting endeavor that I just got ordained into.
I should have went last. Mine came in March 10th, 1989, and it's a very specific date. My wife is here. That's my claim to fame. I'm married to that woman right there.
Amen.
March, yes. Yay! But March 10th, 1989, we lost our first child. Wow. And I was a deacon at the time, and in the military. Didn't know what to do, how to get there, and so met with my military chaplain, who it was the worst visit that I ever had. And I didn't have much respect for chaplains at that time. I just want to be transparent. Now I work with chaplains, right? And then my pastor really wasn't much of a help. Everybody kept telling me to be strong for my wife. Nobody asked me how I was doing. And a couple of Sundays later, I had to go back to Denver for some duty. I don't remember what I was going there for. All I know was that's the place where my son died. And I wasn't ready to go. But I had to go. It was military duty. And that Sunday, I'm in church, and I'm sitting down. The pastor preached. To this day, I don't remember what he preached. But I remember he said, "If you need prayer, come to the altar." And I knew I needed prayer because I really couldn't comprehend or connect the dots of what he was saying, because my mind was doing whatever my mind was doing. And for the first time in my life, I cried in public. And I didn't know what to do with that emotion, because I'm having an internal conversation saying, "Stop crying, you're embarrassing yourself." But myself was not listening. And so the more I had this internal conversation, the more the tears was flowing. And apparently it got so bad they put me in a side room because I couldn't control it. And she came in, and the only audible voice I heard that day was hers. I was on the way to a mental breakdown and didn't know it, but it was her voice that brought me back to reason. So that's when I realized, but I didn't know where to go and get help, and the help that I sought after really wasn't help.
You want to go ahead? Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay. Let's see, I think for me it was 2012, 2013, and I was applying for the senior rabbi position at my former congregation, and they had opened up the search to a lot of other people, so I was competing with people from outside for this job. It was incredibly stressful, and people just kept telling me, "Keep smiling, just be you." I had a feeling things were really not okay, and I stopped sleeping. I just wasn't sleeping anymore. I was just sleeping a few hours a night, and I was taking painkillers because I wasn't taking care of my body or teeth, and I was in a lot of pain. And one day I was on my way to work, and I threw up a little bit on my clothing. I was sleep deprived. I was taking painkillers, and I realized I was just planning to go to work, and I realized this is not sustainable. You know, I'm falling apart, and I was the mother of, 2 young children, and I started to listen to my deep internal wisdom about what was going on in my life and reached out for help.
There's so many. Did you say the first time?
You can pick one.
I think early, and like you, I've been at this almost 40 years. And I think early in my teaching ministry, pretty quickly, I remember within the first year getting student evaluations back that were about my clothes and how I looked. which was not something my male colleagues got. And I remember kind of that imposter syndrome, that sense of maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I'm not a real professor because I don't have leather patches on my elbows or carry a pipe or something. And so that imposter syndrome combined with flip side, I'm supposed to be the expert that knows stuff. And having students come and not just students, my family members, friends, want to know, well, what does God think about this? Or what does God, like I have a special hotline, and I know pastors get this a lot. And so that kind of whiplash of, on the one hand, you're closer to God and you're the expert. On the other hand, this kind of sense of being dismissed. Or not a real professor because, the way you dress or something. Especially those first couple of years, I could give other examples, but that sense that create a lot of anxiety, and a lot of I'm not okay. Happily, because I had started having, when I was a young adult in college, I'd had panic attacks. And so through cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, thank goodness, I'd learned some techniques, and I remember needing those in that first few years of teaching, and then having some really good people to talk to. Yeah,
that leads into my next question, which is going to be at that point in your respective careers, in the early seasons, at what became the positive resources for you. Bishop Alexander, you talked about what wasn't, right? How did you recover? Or how did you start to make that realization, something isn't right here, how do I address this in that season?
Unfortunately, can you hear me?
Yep.
I faked it for a number of years. Mm-hmm. I was broken inside, but continued. You can preach, study scripture, preach, move the crowd. But it wasn't until I went to CPE, clinical pastoral education, that I realized how broken I was,
That'll get you.
how much I needed help. So CPE was where I found the tools I needed to make it through. But by that time, I did CPE. How many years after Joshua? A number of years, huh? It was a number of years, and during those times, nobody sat down with me again to ask me, how you feeling? So I kept pushing. I know how to push through pain and fake it till you make it, but I was not making it. I was faking it.
Go ahead.
So we'll put the joke aside of my ordination and really dig into the heart of where I kind of have felt the support and maybe even lack of support, where in 2013, I think maybe 2014, it was the spring of 2014, I was in Oklahoma City, and I was the dean of the cathedral, which is a big deal in the Episcopal Church, and I was talking with our chair of our women's ministry, and she said something that I just flew off the handle right in front of a bunch of people. So all of a sudden, I found myself being shipped to Houston with my wife to do total psychoanalysis and psychiatry and psychology stuff, and we went through cognitive tests, all this kind of thing, and so the help was adversarial. My bishop stepped in, and it was adversarial. It was like, you're going to do this because we think I'm a recovering alcoholic. I had been sober at that point for almost 20 years, so everyone thought I was drinking again and that kind of stuff, but never really got the help that I needed. And come to find out now that 3.5 years ago I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. That was the beginning of Parkinson's, where I wasn't functioning on full level. I wasn't sleeping well, and that's when really I should have really identified the Parkinson's, and that's why I flew off the handle, is because it was just, I was frustrated with myself. Now I get the help that I need, which is great, and it's not adversarial. I've been real open with who I am and what I'm going through, and the church I serve here is just a loving, caring community, and they've wrapped their arms around me and walked with me on it, and so that's good. I think one of the things I struggle with, though, is people ask me, do you go to a Parkinson's care group, like because there's many of those in our city. And I usually, I said no, because I've gone to one, and all of a sudden when they find out I'm clergy, all of a sudden, I'm praying for people, it's not, I'm not being cared for anymore, or able to express my struggles, because now I'm the clergy person in the group. And so I've found my connections with individuals and that kind of thing, but I've had to be very intentional carving that out and really making sure that I find the help that I need.
So as a member of the clergy, someone asked me the other day what was my superpower, and I think my superpower has been that I show up no matter what for the people and the congregation, and that is both good but also can be very detrimental. And so when I first sought care, after noticing that things were spiraling downward, I went to my primary care physician, and they prescribed an anti-anxiety medication, which I went on and helped, and it helped for many years. And I tried to see therapists, but one of the things that was a major stumbling block for me was that I really needed a Jewish therapist. I needed a therapist who understood my culture, my background, because when I was with a therapist who wasn't Jewish, it was basically an intro to Judaism course for the many, many, many months, explaining terms and concepts. And finally, Kaiser had on their search engine for therapists, they put religious background. And I was able to find a female Jewish therapist, and I started working with her and did pretty intensive EMDR therapy with her for 2 years, and really, really powerful work. And just recently we moved down to once a month, and she said, do you want to keep working with me? And I said, I have to be in relationship with a therapist at least once a month, no matter what, as long as I'm working as a pulpit rabbi. I should have been working with a therapist from day one after my ordination, because so much comes at you, and it comes so quickly, and so much had gone unprocessed in my life. It was like you move to the next thing, and then there's the baby naming and the wedding and the funeral, and you just keep going, and that can hurt you over time. So it's been a long journey, but I did eventually find an appropriate person to help me with my care.
Yeah, I've accessed mental health care at many different points. In the loss of a child, after miscarriages, and then just sometimes ongoing in the midst of anxiety. In 2010, I guess it was 2011, I was driving to work, lived in Washington, D.C., Prince George County, Maryland, driving to work, and I realized I was crying, and in fact that it was Friday, and I'd cried every day to work, and somehow I'd managed to not know that about myself, to be in complete denial that I was crying again on the way to work. And it partly was because then I had to realize, and again, somehow I'd been able to ignore, to just kind of bracket and compartmentalize that I hadn't been sleeping. Because I was anxious. And I was anxious because I was dean of a seminary at the time. And it was a very tense time in D.C. There was a lot going on, and I don't need to go into the backstory of that. But that was sort of a wake-up call that I was starting to fall apart. That I was shaky, I was reactive, I would bite people's head off, all of that. And I was so far gone, I was so debilitated, I didn't know how to ask for help, I didn't know who to call. It didn't even occur to me, to call a therapist. That's how far, and so the only thing I knew was to call my doctor. And luckily, at the time, that was a nurse practitioner. And she said, first, we got to get you sleep. Secondly, you got to get a therapist. I also had a spiritual director. And that was hugely helpful because that was a place I could tell the truth and start telling the truth to myself. right? And within a year, I left that position because I could not stay well in that position. And that was part of, I do believe God's calling me, God's messaging me through my body to say, this isn't the ministry for you right now, after being in that role. But it took a whole group of professionals in that setting, yeah.
All right, so I'm veering off my notes because there is a theme developing here, I think, of inattentiveness, unattentiveness, right, to our own selves. And so I'm wondering, what is it, do you think, about the nature of our roles that leads to that? Or if you think that it is something about the nature of our roles? Yeah.
I seem to be the one going first all the time.
My man.
You're the elder statesman. There you go, man. You got the most experience. There you go.
I got the gray hair.
Okay, well, you can't tell.
He's a military man.
Yeah,
through and
that's right.
through. Yeah.
That's true. I think for me, I first had to fight through a cultural understanding of mental illness. Black people are not crazy. That's the message. I tell this story all the time at the church. I had an aunt who was on vacation for 3 years. Every time we go, where's Aunt Jean? Oh, she's on vacation. Yeah. Now, I'm 11 years old, so you can't challenge an adult, right? But that don't make sense. You come back 3 months later, and she's still on vacation, and you come back again. And this is years she's been on vacation. How long is this vacation? So nobody ever told us the truth. To this day, we knew she was committed. That's all we know, right? So the family kept it a secret. And so for me, addressing mental illness is the family secret. You don't get that. Other people get it, we don't. So part of me, my truth is I'm not okay, but I can't address it. So that's from the cultural side. And as a professional, in the military, you got to suck up and drive on, right? I think you said it right. Mm-hmm. And so I have these two narratives playing in my head at the same time. So I know how to be professional. I can deliver a sermon, I can preach a funeral, do a wedding in a professional state. But if you were to sit me down and gain my trust, then you find that I wasn't okay. But I didn't open myself up either to folks to come into that space because I didn't know how to trust you. And then the other thing, there's a gender role. As a man, you have to be okay. So I had to fight through all of that to finally get to CPE to tell me, oh, you're good, you're broken, right? And that's when I started getting the help. But I had to fight through my culture, my gender, and my professionalism to realize I was not paying attention to me.
Do you want to go?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
Others? Yeah.
Wow, this is a panel full of compassionate deferring people.
I mean, just on I'm going to tell you all stuff you already know. We already have, right, a cultural norm that is where we absolutely worship self-sufficiency. Like, if you can't get it done, what's wrong with you? Mm-hmm. Right? And I am not asking for help. I mean, I grew up in the Great Plains. I am a woman pioneer, and I will do it. And I had 3 brothers, and I'm the only girl, and I'm not a baby. And all of those narratives. So I want to be sure we name that we're in a culture that so worships individualism that what that means is we don't know how to be interdependent and lean on each other, because that looks like weakness and that's failure, and you're not a very useful, valuable human being. So even in the church, we have that kind of messaging, even in religious communities. Now add to that being a religious leader in whatever community you're in, and I'm not a religious leader in the way you all are, but I am in religious communities where I'm a leader. But partly, there is such a sense of the suffering of the people around me that I can assume I don't have a right to have care because they are suffering so much more than I am. And I see it. I see it in my congregation and students, in fact. And so I think that even within Christian circles, that message of love others somehow becomes at the expense of yourself, right? And so it can be really insidious if we don't talk about it in clear ways.
Let me add to that. You just triggered this. I justified some of the things because there's a scripture that said to reign with Christ, you got to suffer with him. So if part of my suffering is to be able to reign, right? So I can justify using scripture. So anyway.
I think that one of the images that prevented me from taking care of myself the way I needed is that in Judaism we describe spiritual leaders as a clay kodesh, which means a holy vessel. And so you're a vessel and you're empty, and that's how you can do the work, is because you're not full of yourself, you're open to the pain and suffering of others. And I realized that you can be spiritually strong and also psychologically weak. And so while my spiritual strength would maintain, my brain would fritz out. I'd lose things. I'd go to the wrong place. I would show up at I was noticing that stress was causing cognitive problems. And it wasn't a spiritual issue for me. It was really like I was not functioning properly, and it was wearing me down. And so that idea of, just being the empty vessel, I have to take care of the vessel or it starts to crack. And that was what was happening for me. In the Jewish community, it's very common for people to see therapists. Being in therapy is not something unusual, seeking treatment in the Jewish community, so there isn't that cultural issue, but I think being a rabbi, people do see you as you're supposed to be close to perfect. And people don't necessarily come to the synagogue with their brokenness. It's a place where people feel like they have to come with their wholeness and their best self as opposed to with their suffering, with their tears. And so I found that showing my cracks has also been a way to change the culture of the synagogue too, to allow for it to be a place for broken people also.
After I got back from Houston on that adversarial psychological cognitive trip that was just a crazy moment in my life, I realized that I needed to seek out a therapist and a spiritual director. Walked into the therapist's office, and the first thing he said to me, he goes, "What are you trying to prove?" And then, I'm like, "You don't even know me. Like, how are you asking me this question?" He goes, "I can just see it in you." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And so I finally realized that I had always been on the younger end of the my clergy colleagues, right? When I went to seminary, I was the youngest seminarian. My dad was the oldest, and we were classmates for 4 years together, which I don't recommend doing, ever. Don't even try it. Don't even think that was neat. Walking down the hall when people go, "Father, Son, and where's the Holy Spirit?" You're going, that is not a Trinitarian formula I want to live into at all. It just was not good at all. So, when your dad is knocking on your door at 6:30 in the morning going, "Hey, can I copy your notes?" I'm like, "No, Dad, you can't. Like, you got to do your own work." Anyway, that was something I had to come to terms with, as I was constantly trying to prove myself to my dad and to the congregations that I was serving. And when I could let go of that, which took probably 3 years of hard work every week, coming to that therapist and a spiritual director. When I could let go of that, then I really truly found who I was and could have the freedom to live into ministry a little more deeply than I had previously. And it was a freedom that I found. But I think all of us, we've heard from all of us here, is that there's this, I don't know if it's a pedestal that we're put on, a virtual or spiritual pedestal, but that's where you feel like you are sometimes, and then you've got to prove that you're worthy of standing in that pulpit or in that pedestal, right? When you let go of that, it's pretty miraculous of what can happen.
Yeah.
But it
And-
does take some folks to help you with that.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
one of the things, Bishop Alexander, that CPE teaches you real quick is that it ain't about you. You learn that real quick. And that was big for
That's
me.
if you have a good CPE
Yes,
director.
if you have a good CPE director,
My
yes.
director, it was all about him. So we
So,
modeled
no,
our
good.
CPE after him, which was
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
But, so, I'm wondering now, we operate in a specific world, right? We access tools that help us understand ourselves in a way that religious communities do, but as religious professionals, I think it would be safe to assume that our spirituality is important to each of us, right? What are some spiritual like tethers for you that aid in your mental wellness, that have over the course of your career? What are some angles of turning the jewel of your spirituality that really helped you understand your mental health?
That's a good question.
The first shall be last.
Yeah, I'll just be real quick and throw one out, and that's been having a spiritual director for the last 25 years. As a place, it's not that she's not a therapist. That's not therapy. And it's often the place I become aware of my mental health issues and needs so that I can, and a place where I know in many ways I'm held accountable to that. And it's wonderful to see the ministry of spiritual direction increasing in Protestant circles. It's been in Catholic circles, for a few centuries now. But anyway, so that's one of the things that comes to mind.
I have a therapist and a spiritual director and a village. However, I think what launched me to be more open was my Archbishop, because he started talking about, he has a therapist. And matter of fact, there was a little joke we would have when he's going to the golf course. That's his part of his therapy. But when he became open with his, gave me permission to be open for mine. So there's multiple things happening at the same time, but I think definitely having a therapist, having somebody who I look up to, be open with his struggles also helped me to own mine and be clear with mine.
I think it's always good to have a spouse that will call you to the carpet. And I came home early one afternoon from the church, and she's like, "You're never home at 2:30. What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm tired. I just, was ranting and raving about stuff." And she goes, "You better call somebody by 5 o'clock. I know they get off work at 5, but you better have a therapist and an appointment by 5, or I'm out of here." I'm like, "Oh boy." So I called and got an appointment, and that person's still on speed dial. I met with him a week at a time, every week for quite a while, helping me just process stuff, and that was good. But having a spouse who knows you the best, who knows when your patterns change and that you're struggling with something, is such a gift to receive. And so, so that's been something that has been wonderful for me, to have that person, to have Robert in my life and have him with his wisdom guide me through it. He's a military guy that suffers from PTSD, and that's why he got into therapy. He's my age, he's a Christian, so I totally identify with, I didn't want to sit there and have to explain what it means to be a pastor or a priest, right? He got it, and that was good. The other thing that I found was, a good friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer during COVID, and he spent 8 months in MD Anderson, where his wife and daughter could not even come visit him because of COVID. And I've always kept a gratitude journal, and I do a 5-year gratitude journal. So I would write in the first year, and then the next year when I came back to that same date, I could see what I was grateful for the year before, and then I could build on that every year. And Gary knew that, because he and I had talked about that. But even in the midst of this extreme cancer, this really painful, awful cancer, he could still find stuff that he was grateful for. And this is what he taught me. He said, you can write down that stuff, but you've got to open up your journal the next morning and read it, what you wrote the day before, and build on that. And that's what he taught me. And I was like, how do you do that, even in the midst of not being able to see your family and that kind of thing? He said, God will always give you something to be grateful for. You just have to see it and look for it. And so that's been something that has just changed my life big time. And I do that to this day in honor of him, but also because I know it works as well. So.
For me, it was when I became trauma informed. Before I learned about the impact of trauma on our brains and our bodies and our minds and spirits, I used to tell our staff at the synagogue, everything's pastoral. If someone calls and they're mean on the phone, that's pastoral. If every interaction we have with anybody at this institution at its core is pastoral. And then I became trauma informed and I realized that that can expand outside the synagogue to a lot of interactions, understanding trauma. My mother was a refugee from Morocco to Israel and then to the United States. And she lived with a lot of trauma, and I didn't understand her trauma until she died as a result of her mental illness in 2019. And in working through her death, it really transformed my whole view of the world, but especially of her, of understanding how so many of her behaviors and the struggles we had, our whole lives. And she was a Rebbetzin, which is rabbi's wife, which is a role in the Jewish community. So she lived with mental illness, and people in the community would call her crazy. And I heard that a lot. And so I also had a lot of internalized stigma of being perceived as crazy. And looking back now, I just can't believe that people didn't see her trauma and that I didn't see her trauma. She's a refugee. English is her second language. She's living in a part of the country where no one else has her same culture. She, was experienced anti-Semitic sexual violence as a child in Morocco, so much, but I was not trauma informed. And so that education has really transformed my worldview.
Well, thank you all for sharing so beautifully and so openly about that. I'm wondering, our last question before we open it up to the group, how have you seen understandings of mental health for religious professionals change over the course of your careers, to where we can even have this conversation now? Or have you, I suppose. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm thinking.
Our brave bishop.
Yeah.
You're just quick.
Well, then that means I'll go first and mess it up so they can fix it up. I have seen a change. And I think more clergy today are more open to have that conversation with other clergy. There's a saying I heard many years ago, you don't preach where you bleed, right? And so it's hard to be bleeding to your congregation. So many clergies now are finding other avenues for help, whether it be professionals, other clergies. Right now I'm training Army chaplains, right? And in the military, they're active duty, and they're still facing some of the old stigmas, right? But in CPE, they have them permission to face what they know is broken, but they have to do it in a safe space. And CPE, and this is a specialized program. So I have seen changes, but yet some of the old stigma is still there.
Yeah, I think it's changed drastically. Part of that in this community is the Bridges to Care program that I've been a part of, and that has given me new insight to a lot of different things that I didn't know about. My seminary now in Austin, they actually have a counseling degree that you can get. That did go to Southwest, yeah. But when I was there, they had nothing related to mental health at all. It was always about, how you can teach the Bible better and preach better. It was nothing about care for yourself or where you go or how you do that or how do you even care for others. I had one class on pastoral care. And it was taught by a guy who was so uncaring that we just really didn't learn much. We learned, it was just awful, right? It was just crazy. And I hate to say that about my seminary. I won't tell you the name of the seminary for you guys, because it's totally different now. But now they actually do train clergy in a counseling degree program. And you can actually go through as a layperson also. And so I think it's become vitally important to who we are and what we do. And I've always thought about going back to school, and then I realized, no, don't want to do that. I'll just get as much education as I can from people in this community who are much wiser than me. And so that's where Bridges to Care has been such a gift to me in my ministry.
And let me give a quick. I work at the University of Incarnate, which I've been there about 26 years. When I first started there, we had 2 counselors. Today we have 6, maybe 7 full-time, and 4, maybe 5 interns. So the need is there, and the university responded.
I joined the board of NAMI Washington after my mother's death to honor her life and spirit. And one of the projects I've taken on is to work with the staff and other volunteers to develop a 6-session course of study for clergy on becoming mental health informed. So we took the provider program, NAMI's provider training, and we adapted it for faith leaders. And then we wrapped it in a bunch of lovely stuff like meditations and framing texts. And so we're piloting that right now, and we hope to launch our first cohort in October. It's an interfaith cohort, and the goal of this 6-session program is that they'll stay as a cohort and meet once a month for continued mutual support and education. So I have been very inspired to offer to other faith leaders continued education and training, and my ultimate goal is to bring it to seminaries, because that's where we really need it, is before you go out there serving the world with all your enthusiasm, to have this very basic mental health education that NAMI is so brilliant at providing. And so that has been my life's work for the last 4 years.
We need that. Can we get in on that?
I want to come back next year and I'll present on it. Yes.
That's right. We need a whole training session on that. We'll keep you in mind.
I'm really so hopeful, because the folks I know under 40, this is not an issue, being vulnerable and I think, so yes, that has shifted. And I think, frankly, the internet has played a big role. It is much harder for leaders to hide. To hide our problems, to hide our bad days. It's on film somewhere. And then Brene Brown comes along and does a TED Talk on vulnerability. And so there's a lot of cultural pieces, I think, that have helped just value authenticity, and that can become its own brand, right? That can get commodified. So I think we've got to be careful about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question for our panel. We might, yeah, I know. I'm gonna start preaching in a second. We have a great, how does your community help you? Because we have our community with us. How does the people around you, how do they help you journey with your own mental health, with your own self, really?
Wow.
I have recently really been more intentional in creating what I call my village. And in my village is my wonderful wife. Then I have 2 other people who are near and dear to me, who I look up to in ministry, and my spiritual director. And I present things to them, and they challenge me and question this. And so my village has given me permission to be open, candid, and yet handle me with tender loving care, which now allows me to go back to my church and be candid and be not afraid of judgment, because I'm broken today, I'm okay. And when I give them permission, then we start programs in our church. So on every 3rd Sunday, and this is a shameful plug, but I'm saying, every 3rd Sunday, we have Wellness Sunday. Our Sunday school, the sermons, and our podcast is built around wellness, not just illness, but wellness. And this wonderful young lady right there, Donna, has been instrumental in putting the programs together, and she leads that for us, and we attend, and I don't think she's ever finished a session because our church will engage. And they're not afraid no more, right? I'm not saying I'm the only reason. I think when you give permission to people to be open, it's open.
Yeah, sure does. We've had a number of our folks go through the Bridges to Care training, not as many as I'd like, but we're getting there. And I think that's opened the door for us to make mental health be a part of our everyday conversation in the church. And Christ Church is an incredible community. I'm dumbfounded by it all the time. It's just not a typical church at all, which is great. I mean, the love and care that I receive from people is just absolutely incredible that I've never experienced anywhere else in my whole ministry from lay people in the church. When people say, hey, I'm praying for you, I'm like, oh, thanks, I really appreciate that. They go, no, I'm going to pray for you right now. They stop me in the hall and lay hands on me and pray for me. I'm like, this is the weirdest thing ever, because it doesn't ever happen anywhere else, like any other church I've ever served. And so that gives me more of a freedom to share more openly about what I'm going through and the struggles that I have, which then in turn allows others to do the same. Recently, I shared about my own journey with depression and anxiety, and I literally, my email box exploded because of people saying, thank you for sharing that from the pulpit, because I'm in that same journey, which I didn't even know about many of the folks. And then I had a young man in our congregation come in, young guy, I mean, young adult, 20 years old, came in and he's like, I've never met with a clergy person before. He was nervous as heck. And I'm like, it's all good, man. And so we sat there and talked, and he just unloaded everything going on in his life as well, that of his same struggles. And so it's, so yeah, when we can find that place of vulnerability, but that has to start with a community that truly loves us and cares for us as clergy, because otherwise, if you open that box and there's not that group around you, then you could be in a real danger place. Yeah.
So synagogues in America are run differently than many other, like especially large Christian denominations, in that every synagogue is its own 501c3 with its own board, and we do not receive direction from a central organization. So it means that the people who hire and fire me and supervise me are the members of the board of directors of our congregation exclusively, and so the people I serve as a spiritual leader are also my supervisors. Wow. And that creates a horrible situation for almost all rabbis psychologically. It's terrible. It's a horrible system. It's the worst thing about being a rabbi is being managed by a nonprofit board who people coming in with lots of different skills, none of them can do your job or ordain spiritual leaders. And so my congregation, we have tried to address that because it's such a source of discomfort for me and for the board members by adopting what we call a sacred partnership model. That the rabbi and the board, that we and the congregation are in sacred partnership and sort of really talking about our relationship and having a code of ethics for the congregation, because they recognize that I also need to be safe, and there need to be ways to create a safer environment for the rabbi if there are people who are harassing me or doing things that are making my workplace environment an uncomfortable place to be. And so being in that kind of relationship and transforming it with the congregation from my bosses, that I also happen to be their rabbi too, to a sacred partnership has gone a long way in easing that discomfort.
Can I ask a question? Did you ask for that process to start, or did you name your discomfort, or did somebody else? Because that's such a sign of
all
health.
the time. Okay. Yeah, because it's so uncomfortable.
Right.
It is so uncomfortable. Yes, and my husband's a rabbi too, you know, and so was my dad. So it's been my whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a child, the synagogue president beat up my mother.
Oh my gosh.
Another woman, and she came home completely bloodied, and we didn't call the police because she was president of the synagogue. So those are the kinds of things that I've been living with, and it's very, very difficult, that power dynamic. I really wish we had bishops and people and other clergy who supervised us rather than lay people.
I'll pass.
Okay.
Let's have a broader conversation.
Well, here it is, folks. You have 10 minutes to ask clergy people any question you've ever wanted. Yes. Yeah. I don't know if it reaches that far, so yeah.
So my question is around, part of my role a couple of years ago was going out to faith communities and talking about mental health, which is my passion. But I also have encountered some faith leaders who they have an understanding that it's important, but will not bring it to their congregation. And I guess my question has to do with if there was someone in the congregation who says that we gotta talk about this, we have to, what can they do if their leadership is not open to
I feel like we've established a dynamic here.
I'll say something real quick so you don't have to go first. But I think it's going to take the leadership, the pastor or the rabbi, to actually experience their own mental health crisis for them to buy in, right? If they're so stuck that they can't, bring something that would serve their people, they're going to have to experience it themselves, right? It's going to have to come so close to home that it becomes very real for them. Which is sad to have to say that, but I think that's the God honest truth. I mean, I think we're in an uphill battle still with some of our folks. And it might take us on this panel and other people speaking more openly about that and calling our colleagues out in a compassionate, loving way, is saying, don't wait until you have a crisis to actually educate your congregation, because the more they're educated, the more they'll be able to care for you and other people, and you don't have to care for everybody, right? And we aren't called to do that, so I think that's really the reality of it. So. And with that, I've got to run because I've got to get ready for our next plenary, which I encourage you to come. You'll hear our mayor and his son and wife, an interview with the three of them. So it's going to be good.
Thank you, Justin.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of Justin. I think that's one way. But my experience was a little bit different. We brought in a group called the Journey of Hope, and this is a group that goes around the nation speaking against the death penalty. And it's founded by a gentleman whose grandmother was murdered by 4 teenage students who played hooky from school, and she brought him into the house and they killed her. He formed this group, and they go around. So it's people who've been on death row, who have been exonerated, people against the death penalty, and people who have family members who suffered violent crime. Well, we brought her in. Actually, the founder came into our church and talked about his experience. One of our leaders, who we have known for years, said something that shocked me. She said, my grandmother was murdered, and we've known her, worked with her all these years, and she never mentioned that until we brought in this group. That was a key for me. How am I pastoring folks and I don't know them? And so that opened up conversations to other possibilities. So yes, we can experience our own trauma, our own mental health issues, but that was a cry in that congregation that we paid attention to.
And I asked that question because I absolutely love talking about what we do at my church. When we have discussions about wellness, we go there.
Yes.
And so I share that because I want folks to know that what is happening. And so when I'm asked how can I do that when we don't have the buy-in, That's why I asked that question.
Let's see, we have 5 minutes. Any other questions?
There's one right.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to address real quick, the churches that you went to and got no response, you may have clergy that was in their own journey and not have it figured out yet.
That's
Yeah.
good.
But with everything you guys have shared today, it's fantastic. I would love to know what you're doing today for self-care.
That's easy one. That's the easy question. One of my self-care things, my wife and I have been doing this for years. Every 90 days or so, we go out and be us. Right? We have date nights. We go out. We have staycations and vacations. There's places in San Antonio we go. We don't stay home because if we stay home, people come knocking on your door. I'm in your neighborhood. No, you're not. So you live out in SeaWorld. And so we only keep people know where we are, and we get away. So part of our self-care is for us to continue to date, to be happy, and hold ourselves accountable. And if anybody knows my wife, she has no problems holding me accountable.
Amen.
Yes.
Okay, I'll give my latest, guilty pleasure fun thing is to sit and watch NFL football.
There you go.
Which, for most of my life, I thought that was wasting time. Think of all the things I could be getting done. So to give myself permission to just, those things last like 3 hours. And so that's just one example, just more permission to not be productive if there's something I'm really going to enjoy.
I grew up in a clergy household where we had people coming in all the time, people living with us, staying with us. And since we're both clergy, I think we made a smart move 21 years ago, and we bought a very small house. A very, very small house. And so the house, our home, is my second sanctuary. That's the place where we can both be, since we both work in synagogues, where we can come home, and that is, the place, another sanctuary we nurture and tend and keep holy for our own well-being. So having a really, really little house where you can't really invite too many people over is really helpful. That's self-care.
Let me add one more. My wife attests to this. I love to iron. And I would iron on a Sunday night, watching football, bring me your clothes. I love to see the finished product. And that is satisfying for me. So she brings the clothes and we iron. Now, once I iron on Sunday, don't bring it on Monday. That's not my, it ends, right? That's a Sunday.
One more question? Yeah.
How does it go to pastor a congregation, knowing that you might have like polar personality, schizophrenic in your midst, who's just stable? What does that evoke in you as pastoral?
I didn't hear the question.
So the question is, what does it invoke in us as clergy to know that in our congregation are people in the midst of potentially serious mental health journeys themselves? Yeah.
I'm not a pastor. You go ahead.
Yeah. You can speak to students.
Yeah.
I have both roles. I work with students all day. I was with students this morning, and we have a congregation. So they're one and the same to me. Crisis is crisis, regardless of what age you are, and being able to journey with them. I think what makes my journey and in our congregation is that we know where the resources are. If you don't know where resources or what resources are available, that can be scary. So recently we had an issue with somebody in our church, and my wife said, okay, then she called Donna, and they went over and was able to assess the situation. I think pastors who don't have those resources, don't have the skills, it scares them, because you don't have to respond. And prayer is not always the answer.
I agree that I used to feel a lot of fear of, and in my experience, sometimes people just show up at services in the midst of a crisis. And a lot of the people in the congregation don't know what to do, and they think that there's like a place to take them. And in our community, there is not, other than the ER. And people are really shocked to find out that we have very limited resources available to us in those moments of crisis, and sometimes someone continues on their journey and they leave the doors of the synagogue and continue on, their being in crisis. And for myself, knowing and admitting, first of all, there are no easy or quick answers in crisis, at least in the Seattle area. There's very few places to go, and that we can do what we can do in the moment to show love, care, offer the resources we have, but also to know that this is so much bigger of a situation than any one synagogue or church can address. And that's why I'm so grateful for Pathways to Hope and NAMI, all these organizations that really help me feel less fearful and have greater faith.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, because knowing the resources is helpful. I think another reaction that I had to your question is it's kind of the whole point. Like, I hope there are. I hope the people who are in crisis are coming. I want them there. I also want to be able to help them, more so than just pray and move on. And one of the difficulties is that you can't. Sometimes they are going to leave, and you won't see this person again, and that sticks with you sometimes. Or as a chaplain, sometimes that person was inpatient for a day and a half, and then they're gone, and you'll never see them again. And there is a boy at Children's Hospital San Antonio, and I think about him 5 times a week, and I hope he's okay. And I don't know. Yeah, so I hope they're there, and I hope we have the resources to help them. So yeah, thanks everybody for being here. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much for asking me. What a wonderful opportunity.